On this episode of the End of Tourism podcast.
It is coastal colonialism. It's a kind of plantation tourism, and the numbers very consistent with colonial logic around ownership of land, possession of land, what land is used for, and who the usage of land benefits. The resources of the land benefit the colonial master. In this case, it is the government of Jamaica. The elites are sometimes Jamaican, sometimes they are multinational corporations. So all of these kind of things are linked to plantation tourism, the exploitation of labor. Now, in 2024, the tourism product made $4.3 billion US dollars, and more than 3 billion of it did not stay in Jamaica, may not even enter the country because of the way these transactions are done. You could book your tour from overseas, pay for your hotel from overseas, you pay for your flight. So those dollars does not even enter the country. So all of these things are very similar to the way the plantation work.
Welcome to the End of Tourism. Conversations on wanderlust, exile, and radical hospitality. A quick reminder that the podcast lives on a gift economy model, which means that anyone, anywhere can listen, regardless of their economic situation. Your gift ensures it stays that way, free of advertisements and members-only paywalls. It allows me to devote a great deal of time to this project, to pay for the software and hardware that makes the podcast possible, as well as all of the production and post-production labor. In order to keep the project fed, you can subscribe by making monthly, annual, or one-time offerings at chrischristu.substack.com, where you'll also have access to my writing on these and other subjects including food culture, psychedelics, media ecology, and myth. You can also support us by leaving a review for the pod on Apple or Spotify, by sharing the episodes with your friends, and by following us on social media via the handle, The End of Tourism. On this episode, my guest is Dr. Devon Taylor, the president of the Jamaica Beach Birthright.Environmental movement, or JaBBEM, an advocacy group founded in 2022 that fights for equitable beach access and environmental justice in Jamaica. He is a biomedical research scientist and environmental and social justice advocate who leads efforts to repeal the colonial-era Beach Control Act of 1956, which he describes as discriminatory and a barrier to public access. JaBBEM uses legal tools, including the Prescription Act of 1882, to establish long-standing community rights to beaches and rivers. The group is currently involved in multiple court cases, including those concerning Bob Marley Beach, Little Dunn's River, and flanker Providence Beach, to secure public access and prevent privatization by luxury resorts like Sandals. Dr. Taylor emphasizes that beach access is a fundamental human right and reparative justice issue, arguing that Jamaica's beaches, national treasures, should be accessible to all Jamaicans, not just tourists. He calls for government action to replace outdated laws with modern legislation that ensures constitutional protection for public access and sustainable management of coastal resources. So welcome, Dr. Taylor, to the End of Tourism podcast. Thank you for being willing to join me today. And I'm wondering, to start, if you could share with our listeners where you're sitting today and what the world looks like there for you, where you are.
Yeah, funny enough, I'm sitting just outside of Washington, D.C. today.
Oh.
I just got back from Jamaica, all right? And I'm just outside the capital of the quote-unquote free world today, yeah. But Jamaica is home, so I just got back from some community service work, advocacy work, and I'm happy to engage the End of Tourism audience and share what the experience and the livity of the Jamaican people is like.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. As far as I understand, you are the president of JaBBEM, the Jamaica Beach Birthright.Environmental movement, which was founded in 2022 as a, quote, grassroots organization acutely aware of the adverse effects of misguided development and environmental injustices to beaches, beach property, and sensitive terrestrial ecosystems, end quote. And so I'd like to ask you, Devin, a bit about your story, about how and why JaBBEM was created, if I can.
Yeah, so my story is the story of my community of Steertown, a coastal community that I grew up in. But that's also the story of the descendants of enslaved Africans, really, on a farmer slave plantation known as Jamaica, right? It's a history that is rooted in displacement, dispossession, and disempowerment of a people. So JaBBEM is a response to continued injustice not only to black bodies, and the indigenous ones, the Tainos who were there first, right, but also the desecration of land, right. Land have a relationship with human beings and with the indigenous people, and we have a relationship with land, but all that get disturbed through these quote unquote development. So, myself, my community experienced that displacement and dispossession and disempowerment in 2019 in the heights of COVID, when our childhood beach that our community has been using for more than 100 years, we were displaced from it. And the displacement, it's around 29 acres of beachfront land that the community, as an extension of our community that we use for everything that Jamaicans use the beach for, right? Recreation, fishing, spirituality, courtship, artisan work, farming, all that space that offers a multitude of opportunities, multitude of possibilities, right, which made it that node, that connectivity to the community of Steertown, to the community of Chalky Hill, to the community of Epworth and Davis Town, and parts of Sandals Bay and towards the Mecca of Ocho Rios. This is what this place represented. It was a community, right, that birthed ideas and continual livity of our people. And we were displaced from it by force. Force that was part of the state, the Jamaican police, private security, the political class. It was violent. It was a very violent displacement. And so if you ever experience dispossession and displacement, it unsettles you, it arms you, you are rattled, right? And so we had to figure out how this happened and how we need to move, because we're a resilient people who never give up. This is why we're able to survive 500 years of chattel slavery. So it took us a minute to kind of understand what was happening and knowing that we have to move from the grassroots. We have to come together in solidarity and form something that could push back at our displacement. So JaBBEM was born through state-sponsored violence and private violence, the displacement of communities from beach ecosystem, from the sea in that time.
Thank you for that, Dr. Taylor. You mentioned 2019 as a kind of watershed moment for your community and for the creation of JaBBEM. But of course, most people have some understanding that the tourism industry has a long history on the island in Jamaica. And there's something that arises quite a bit in the work of your organization and in the interviews and in the media that's come out, and specifically around a law that was created or enacted in 1956, the Beach Control Act in Jamaica. And so I'm wondering if you would be willing to offer up a little bit about this law, why it's so infamous in your country, and maybe a little something of what was happening in Jamaica before 2019 and perhaps since that law was created in the 50s.
Yeah, the struggle for beach rights, access to the beaches, use of the sea, is historical, right? There are giants before my time who stood in the fight. You know what I mean? We had Dr. Carlin Cooper, you know what I mean, very instrumental. John Maxwell. We have Kabu Mahat Karu. We have Esther Figueroa and many other Jamaicans who lend their voice to a struggle, observing and seeing that with every new hotel that's built, every new villa that's built, every new guest house that's built, is a loss of the Jamaican people to really continue to enjoy spaces that they have been doing for childhood, right? You know, as you mentioned, there's a long history of tourism in Jamaica. Yes, there is. I mean, Jamaica is still a colony of England. King Charles is still the king of Jamaica, right? With all that said, Jamaica does have its prime minister who runs the country, and the king don't really get in his way. So all the experiences of the Jamaican people now is actually a product of the political class that is running the country. And the tourism model at one point was more integrated, right? There was more a blend of locals and visitors traversing beaches and enjoying these spaces, walking around in the country, participating in other cultural activity that is not based along the beach, right? They would come into villages, enjoy villages. You know, that was true for also my community. My community was close to a couple of these hotels and guest houses at the time. Many members in our community work in these spaces. Some of those tourists venture up into the village and enjoy all that we offer, you know, in the Jamaican life. I should point out that musical albums between Keith Richards of the Rolling Stones was made with members of the Steertown community. Wingless Angel is the name of that album. So this was a time when there was more of that kind of integration. But the colony that Jamaica is, right, and just pre-independence, Jamaica became independent in 1962. A law was passed in 1956, just on the eve of independence, which you alluded to earlier, the Beach Control Act of 1956. And we're still trying to fully grasp why there was a need to put a law in place that says that no Jamaicans have the right to the foreshore or the floor of the sea. And as translated by the head of the national agency, NEPA, that you do not have the right to swim, to bathe, to fish, to walk along the foreshore. All those rights are vested in the government, vested in what they basically call the crown, controls all that kind of things. And the thinking we're trying to understand, but the result is very clear that it stripped us of any inherent rights to the foreshore. Stripped us. And very important for accessing beaches is the rights to land. So you cannot get to the beach or the sea without traversing land.
Right.
And so this legislation really inherently did not give us any land rights. And that is what, happened post-emancipation. There was never any reparative justice around the rights of descendants of enslaved Africans to land, where compensation was given to the enslavers. They got millions and millions of dollars when slavery was abolished. There was no compensation to the descendants in any form, no rights to land, no distribution of land, nothing that was constitutionally put in place, nothing provisions were made. In fact, the Secretary of the Islands make sure that they put tariffs so high on government land that the descendants could not afford them. So it kept the Jamaican people, and for that case, most of the Caribbean islands landless, right? So we walk out of slavery as a homeless people, despite the many rebellions and revolutions that were fought by our ancestors to free our people. The powers to be never gave us any of that rights to land. And so the 1956 Beach Control Act is consistent with colonial logic of dispossession and disempowerment.
Wow.
And that's what that legislation has really done to us.
Wow. Yeah. I mean, some of the statistics that have come up in JaBBEM's research is that at least 35% of Jamaica's GDP is tourism. That 25% of all jobs on the island are tourism-based jobs. That 70% of tourism dollars go to foreign investors, while only 10% goes to the community and 20% going to the government. Then finally, less than 1% and maybe less of Jamaica's shoreline is accessible to Jamaicans. You refer to this, I think, as coastal colonialism. Is that right, Devin?
Yeah, it is coastal colonialism. It's a kind of plantation tourism, right? And the number speaks for themselves, right? I mean, very consistent with colonial logic around ownership of land, possession of land, what land is used for, and who the usage of land benefits. The resources of the land benefit the colonial master. Of course, in this case, it is the government of Jamaica with its elite. You know, the elites are sometimes Jamaican, sometimes they are multinational corporations. Right, so all of these kind of things are linked to plantation tourism, the exploitation of labor. Now, there's no way that you can have in 2024 the tourism product made 4.3 billion US dollars, and more than 3 billion of it did not stay in Jamaica, may not even enter the country because of the way these transactions are done. You could book your tour from overseas, pay for your hotel from overseas, you pay for your flight, you pay all these things. So those dollars does not even enter the country. Even many of the Jamaican owned tourists, their banking companies are in international spaces. Many of these entities are the owners of these hotels. These corporations are also registered in other companies. You'll have some of them registered in other Caribbean islands, St. Lucia, in other tax havens across the planet. So, I mean, all of these things are very similar to the way the plantation work. And then, of course, the workers and the exploitations of the worker being paid very low wages, wages that are not livable wages, you know. I mean, they're overworked. And so the whole thing is consistent, just the way how the plantation works, right? And so we have to call it what it is. And at the same time, you work at the hotel and you can't enjoy the beach, right? Not while you're working there, neither can you go home and says, I'm taking my family of 5 to where I work and I'm going to put my towel down on the beach and take a swim, or I'm going to go row out and I'm going to fish. Right? So, I mean, the whole model as to how it's constructed right now is very oppressive and is a continuation of the systems of oppressions that were characteristic of the plantation. So it makes it a plantation tourism model that the Jamaican government is supporting. All right, and it is the government of the country because, as you mentioned, you know, less than 1% of beaches in the country is accessible by the Jamaicans. The country, the island is 494 miles around, right? Now, 150 miles of it is technically sandy, right? Most of this are rocky terrain, but the rocky terrains are beautiful terrains. You know, these are terrains that we hold meditations from. You know what I mean? We go fish at, you find your moment in these spaces and they're becoming far and few. And that is supported by just the way how the legislation is constructed. And no government in the history of quote unquote independent Jamaica from 62, right? The law will be on the book for 70 years and none of them changed that law to empower the Jamaican people with inherent rights. Not just to, because I know sometimes the reasoning is that, well, we just want to go to the beach to swim. Well, we are thinking about a new imagination of a relationship with the coastline that we have been having for many, many, many decades. It wasn't just swimming. You know, no, it's beyond that. So they may project that that's all we need is just to go into the water, right? I mean, absolutely, that's part of it. Absolutely, we need to go there on our deads that were washed up on the shores. I mean, you know, from these slave ships that many were thrown overboard, many jumped overboard. You know what I mean? But liberty along the coastline for fisher folks, for vendors, for those who harvest seaweed, right? For those, baptism, for the artists who get their inspiration there, for farmers who farm there, right? All these possibilities that we used to use the space for. We're saying that we should be able to continue doing so, right? And we're fighting for this kind of a justice in this space.
Well, I mean, this is a theme, a through line that comes up in so many of the conversations I have with people like yourself who are fighting for land and land rights in their homes and their places. It seems there's so much in common. One of the strange things, I don't know how strange it is really, but I was reading recently on the history of what they call the enclosure of the commons in Britain from, I think, the 13th or 14th century on, and how slowly, little by little, the rich landowners started kind of carving away the land from the peasants and forcing them into the towns and cities to work for wages, essentially, and to undermine not only their ancestral relationships with the land, the places where their dead were buried for many, many centuries, but also the kind of lived spiritual relationship they have with it, right? And so this is something that I've seen on JaBBEM's website regarding the organization's principal goals, and that one of them is, quote, the promotion of environmental personhood to beaches, selected rivers, and important land formations to protect nature for future generations and to safeguard the intrinsic value of nature by recognizing them, that's the beaches, the selected rivers, and land, as living entities, end quote. Now, I think this is something that's a common understanding, if not something that ecologists and environmentalists today campaign for, which is giving waterways and land rights, but also legal and judicial protections. And so I'm curious, how do you think giving legally bound personhood to land and water could change the lives or the relationships that travelers and local people have to those places? When we come to live our lives in the presence of rivers and beaches and land as alive and sentient and as having history, their own personal history, how do you think our relationships to places might change, either as tourists or locals?
Yeah, I mean, these ideas are not distant to the human consciousness because it was like that in the beginning.
Mm.
If we look at the scientific history of Earth, right? The sea, oceans, the birthplace of humanity. We crawl out of the sea onto land. And where did we enter first? Was on the shoreline. So historically, ancient shoreline is the birthplace of humanity. And we just imagine what happened in that space was the beauty of evolution, right? Evolution physically, evolution spiritually, evolution in all ways and form you could think of. That space was a space of just a multitude of births and rebirths, right? A space of energy, all right, that led to all that we know it right now, plants and animal life running around and terra firma. So, I mean, that recognizes that this space have a right to exist because without it, I mean, I and I would not be in existence in this present formation. So it's not really a kind of thinking that is outside of the grasp of humanity. It's just that a version of humanity turn it back against nature, to degrade it, to use it without recognizing the relationship that it had with us. And so to really raise these ideas that the space have its own consciousness, have its own intrinsic value, have its own understanding of I and I, knowing what I needed within such time, gave it to I so that I could thrive and manifest, right? So it did its work and it continued to do its work. It's just humanity, a version of humanity, is robbing the space of its ability to continue serve as a crucible for next generation even the protection of the planet Earth. And you will hear it all the while that the shoreline is very important to protect us against the fallout for climate change in terms of protecting land. We hear those words, but we don't live those words, right? So I think the recognition of personhood status to these kinds of ecosystem will bring us back to our relationship with the land, whereas we are custodian of it and it is custodian of us. And so that kind of duality between man and environment can reign again, so the environment can serve its role in the next phase of human consciousness, right? It's not a space just to see to degrade, but it offers many things. I'm sure you go to the beach, and when you go to the beach, you're alive, right? And you feel more alive when you go to a beach that is rustic, that when you look around, you hear the sounds of nature, right? You can feel the beauty of that sand under your foot. And the smell that you're smelling is smell of a natural coastal forest, a natural ocean. You're not smelling chlorine or suntans, or you're not hearing the bustling of engine mechanizations, you know what I mean? All what we have created in these spaces, right? You're not seeing the beautiful crabs around, the crustaceans in the space. You're not seeing the vibrancy of all the creatures that live in the ocean at near shore, because you take out hectares of grass beds, all right? Which is necessary for replenishing life. The ocean produces more oxygen than the land, because Earth is more than 70% water.
Wow.
All right. So the importance there of understanding personhood status is for us to understand our livity and our life, is critically linked to this space. And that's what we're trying to say. Understand this space for what it meant for human evolution, what it means for continued survival, and allow it to do so. But we have to give it that kind of legal protection. We have to make generations coming on board understand what it is in terms of how critical it is for our livity.
Wow. That's beautiful. Yeah. Thank you so much, Dr. Taylor. When I think about all the times that I spent on beaches, I mean, maybe not as many as other people, but I also think about how much in our time, in the last few generations, that so many people go to the beach to relax. And, as far as I know, this wasn't a very common thing around the world before the Industrial Revolution, to go to the beach to relax, at least en masse, at least with so many people. And it makes me wonder what might be happening mythically or mythologically or mythopoetically when people go to the beach. They lie down in front of the sun and in front of the ocean. And in terms of what you were saying, I always wondered, this seems like a kind of devotion that people are almost in a religious way devoting their bodies to being in this place with the sun and the ocean, but also in this place, as you mentioned, just between the ocean and the land, right? The shoreline. And while it seems like a kind of religious devotion, maybe the fact that it's kind of commodified and industrialized and manipulated in such a way so that people don't recognize the life or lives of the shoreline, of the rivers, of the beach, of the ocean, etc., that there's something in there that humans are longing to express, but it gets turned into this really, really strange and almost demented form of, take my picture and let's put it on Instagram and all that kind of thing, right? So yeah, thank you for that, Devin. It was really beautiful to hear. And for our listeners who can see some of the work that JaBBEM is doing on their website, there's many, many campaigns that your organization is involved in Jamaica. And some of them involve court cases. But I'm curious if you'd be willing to comment, I guess, on how your organization, how your team has been dealing with the campaigns, what kind of successes or failures, what kind of learning has come your way. What can you tell us about the work that you've been doing with the people on the ground there? And what, if any, kind of successes you've had so far?
Yeah. So we have just been around like 4 years now. This is our fourth
Okay.
year, right? Kind of listening to how you were kind of talking about the reverence when one goes into these spaces, right? Because the sea is medicine. It's a medicine space. And I think that's why a lot of people gravitate towards it. And what we're trying to do, right, is saying that everyone should be able to experience their birthplace, which is the forest, right? And so our fight and our struggle is that, as the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea puts it, the sea is the common heritage of humankind. So what we are doing is consistent with what a United Nations goal, that this space, this sea, this ocean, these rivers are common heritage of humanity. And so we must be able to access them, engage them. We must be able to experience them, and they must remain protected for all generations. So M's campaign on the ground are not campaigns that are just for the liberation of the communities where these beaches are, but it's for the community of humanity, that when they come into our country, they will experience the ecological heritage of the country, not restricted by how much money you have in your pocket, how much you could pay to go to one of these all-inclusive hotels or one of these high-end villas that are encroaching in the sea, or any of these hotels that are now building in the sea, is that you would have traveled from another country to experience what the foreshore and the sea, which is your heritage as a human in Jamaica. So the campaign, we are fighting for liberation of the coastline. Right? So we have 5 of these cases right now in the Jamaican court system. Right? Yeah, we have the case fighting for Bob Marley Beach. I mean, I could speak uniquely to what these spaces symbolize, but what they have been for Jamaican people. That particular beach has been a space where Rastafari were oppressed in Jamaica, as a black liberation movement, with its central spiritual nucleus being Emperor Haile Selassie. That beach was the cradle of where thoughts and ideas were born in versions of Rastafari. And we had to move in to protect that space, because ultra luxury hotels is slated to be built there that was going to displace the community. And so that fight continues. All right. We have the fight, of Mommy Bay, which is my childhood space. And we explained to you earlier, more than 100 years of usage within the space, an extension of our community. It's a space that provides livity for many. Right. And we speak to Blue Lagoon, right? Very historical, very beautiful mix of salt and fresh water, with many underground springs being fed from the Blue Mountain, space that was used by the indigenous Tainos and Africans. Use this space for spirituality, for food, for all that you could imagine beyond recreation, right? And this space is being commandeered by elite private interests. We have that in the court. We're fighting our own government for liberation of the Blue Lagoon, which is a national monument, which would mean that how can a national monument be privatized? But Jamaican laws allow for this to happen.
Wow.
And if we don't fight to protect this space for humanity, then you may not be able to see this majestic space. It is the same that is true for Little Dunn's River. Again, the intersection of a beautiful waterfalls with the Caribbean Sea that was occupied by Rastafari from in the 50s. And this space is majestic. The rush of the water, the sound that you hear in this space just brings you to these meditative spaces. Feel the blend of seawater meeting fresh water, and all that turns into the warmth. Right? It's just beautiful. We are fighting for that. And we're fighting, our newest case is in Providence, Flanker, in Montego Bay, one of the tourism Mecca, which, the hotel giant, Sandals Resort International, applied to the National Environmental Planning Agency for a permit to build hotel rooms in the sea and to build villas on this land.
Wow.
And so we are in the courts trying to defend that, because when we lose these spaces, right, it's not just Jamaicans lose. It's just not, we've been ripped from our culture. I mean, is humankind lose? Humankind lose, it's cultural desecration, right? It's exploitation. It's a form of capitalism that see the concentration of wealth in the hands of few people, and the exploitation of labor and degradation of coastal forests. So we're fighting with communities. So the way how we work, every community that we go into express their willingness to protect their spaces. I mean, most of the time they reach out because we're grassroots. We're not an NGO. We don't operate and move like these spaces. We are truly community run, as members from the community that leads up those fights, and we collaborate and we build because we are one people. And the struggle is led by these communities. We're just networking the struggle across the island, just as the struggle for people across the earth is always finding brotherhood, sisterhood, and connection in the struggle for liberation.
Amen. Amen, brother. I'm curious as well if that solidarity has reached beyond the island's shoreline. If you have any brothers and sisters that you've been working with in other Caribbean islands or other countries to forward the cause.
Yeah, man. We work very closely with Stronger Caribbean Together Network. Is a network with other Caribbean countries who are undergoing similar things, similar land struggles for coastal spaces all across the Caribbean. So while the Jamaica has this Beach Control Act that gives us no inherent right to access the beaches and to use the sea, most of the other Caribbean islands, you can access the foreshore and you can use the sea. All right. Jamaica is one of the unique countries that does that. It's notwithstanding, though, that the tourism product across the Caribbean is now where most Caribbean economies are moving towards in terms of investment. So they are building out these hotels and these overwater bungalows across the Caribbean, which is impacting lives and livelihood as well. Because yes, you can go on some of these beaches, but you can't truly enjoy them in their fullness. And they are building on these beaches as well, which is also causing environmental issue. So, it's funny that the commonality among Caribbean islands, since the time of enslavement was plantation economy based on sugar and cotton and rum and all these things. And that was not good for us. And the region now is moving towards a very similar tourism model that doesn't pay its people as much, right? Seeing these lands, coastal lands being owned by private interests, that is actually displacing the indigenous population and the descendants of enslaved Africans from these spaces. So we're not really benefiting at scale to the kind of tourism that is coming into the Caribbean. I think you are in Mexico, you are seeing it in different parts of Mexico too, right? Wealthy people come in, buy coastal lands or lease them. I guess in the case of Mexico, of a slightly different kind of law where I don't think you can own coastal lands. You have the right to beach, but there are barriers that are put in place that makes it difficult for you to sometimes traverse these spaces, and they're intentional. All right. We have experienced them in Puerto Rico as well. We've seen them emerging in places like Costa Rica and in St. Lucia. In spaces, they are wide open, but in spaces you can see the creep is coming, right? Because there's a thing about capitalism where when it comes in, it takes everything. It swallows everything. It's not a good political economic model that takes the environment into consideration as to what it gives back to humanity. So it takes and it takes and it takes. And that's not the sustainability that you will hear being preached on the planet. If we truly want to be sustainable, then the environment must have as much rights as a moving animal. It was here before I and I. Earth existed before I and I. So I and I come in the context of Earth and treating Earth like it's a second class entity in existence. It must be afforded that right. It's only 3% of the planet that is water, fresh water. So we know water is a very essential source for life. So we cannot allow this to be controlled, right? Access to the sea, access to the oceans must not be controlled by no entity. We must freely move in these spaces. So JaBBEM is of the view also that all coastal land must be public land. It must be public land.
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, that offering rights in these regards can definitely change our understanding of how we are with land, of how we are with other people. And I think that in order for the function of rights to work, that we need to undertake a degree of responsibility for how we are with the land, with each other, and the way we implement those rights. And, it's been a great pleasure to speak with you, Dr. Taylor. I know we're just running out of time now. Before we finish off, I'd like to ask in regards to those responsibilities, I'm sure this conversation or question has come up many times for you and your team, your people there on the island. If local people have a responsibility to their homes, to their places, to how they live and even host in those places, then what do you think the responsibilities are of the guest, of what we would otherwise call the tourists in our time? What do you think their responsibilities are when either coming to your island or just even thinking of planning a vacation? Because I've had many guests on the podcast who are fighting similar fights as you and your people are. Some of them say, please come, and we'll figure it out. And some of them say, please don't come. This is not the time. So I'm curious what those conversations look like with JaBBEM.
Yeah, no, it's a good question because we know that there are some countries that too much tourist goes there and it has a critical mass that it can't take anymore, right? And so there's need to kind of regulate the number of people. Jamaica is not at that point right now. And myself and our team believe in freedom of movement. We see this as a world without borders, despite what politicians and kings have drawn artificial borders across the world to limit how you move and requires visa to go in spaces and validation that you can afford your stay within spaces. Yeah, we don't have that view still, Those kind of views are colonial logic because if that unconsciousness was birthed in humanity, then the migration of I and I outside of Africa would never have happened and would have never had the multitude of nations that make this planet a very beautiful space. So freedom of movement is something that we cherished. So come to Jamaica. What we would say is that you need to do your homework. You don't want to participate in injustice. You don't want to participate in indiscrimination. You don't want to participate in displacement and disempowerment of people. So do your homework. So before you come to Jamaica, look where you're staying and check out whether or not these communities can freely access these beaches, use the sea, whether these fishing communities are thriving as they were before, right? Whether or not workers are compensated enough, whether the social health of the community where this hotel is good, whether or not the space that you're actually coming to is degraded. I think these are questions for you to ask yourself. I would say you boycott those spaces because I think one thing that the capitalists understand is that when his money is in threat, his behavior changes. He first gets violent. He first gets violence and come after you, which would be we the people. But if we have the protection of the international community who is demanding a more equitable and just product to interact with, a product that is fair. So you can't be charging me $3,000, $6,000 to stay in a hotel room or $5,500 to stay in a hotel room, but you're paying your people minimum wages that are, I think, 15,000 Jamaican dollar might be $100 a week. That is labor exploitation. Then I'm not going to go there. I'm going to participate in some other products across the island. I know Airbnb have their own sets of issues, but though that's a growing space in Jamaica, small mom and pops establishment that are there. So it might not be easy, but search them out, and we're getting ready to actually help the international community by putting some of that resources on our page so you could see places that you could stay. So we are saying being responsible. Be responsible in your travels. And when you come, venture out, come amongst our people, come experience the real Jamaican culture. Those things are important because tourism is an educational thing, right? It's idea sharing, right? It's cultural exchange, right? It's getting to feel outside of your normal space and get into a new mindset to understand how other people are living around the world and what adjustment you can make in your life. What can you impart? What can you take back? And these things are important for the growth of humanity, for us to understand each other. I think these things prevent wars and conflicts. But contrary, what we see world leaders are doing is driving domination of particular cultures, domination of particular economic systems that are unjust. And Jamaica is still growing. We still have a lot to offer to the world. We provide real good music to the world, but we are beyond music. We're a very creative people of just a lot of goodness and a lot of niceness. So come to Jamaica, but be responsible in your travel and seek out the spaces that are equitable and just, and help in our struggle, advocate on our behalf in the international community for the repeal and replacement of the Beach Control Act of 1956 and for different tourism models to come into play.
Thank you, Dr. Taylor. Our listeners can find out more about the actions and campaigns on the JaBBEM website, JaBBEM.org, if I'm not mistaken.
That's it.
And I believe on Instagram as well.
JaBBEM on Instagram. We are also on Facebook and your TikToks and all your other spaces, and reach out to us. We have a GoFundMe page where we're trying to raise money for legal struggles. We have many more cases that we need to push forward to protect communities. So if you want to help out, check us out and GoFundMe there. And when you come to Jamaica, just link us up and we'll bring you to a couple of the spaces, and in some of the communities, then you'll get the real Jamaica,
So I'll make sure that all those links are up on the End of Tourism website and Substack page when the episode launches. And on behalf of our listeners, Devin, I just like to wish you an amazing, amazing day. And to your team, to your organization, it seems like you're doing incredible work and with a really grounded and equally political and spiritual basis or foundation for the way that you and your team walk in the world. I'm very, very grateful for that and for your time today. So I wish you also the best of luck in the so-called capital of the free world there, and all the best.
Yeah, man. Give thanks, Chris, and give thanks to you and your team for having us. Give thanks.
Thank you for listening. To follow up on this episode, check out the homework section on our website at theendoftourism.com. Likewise, you can subscribe and join the conversation at chrischristou.substack.com. That's CHRISTOU.substack.com. The pod embraces a gift economy model, and by signing up, spreading the word, and supporting us financially, we can ensure that this work continues in a good way. Until next time, farewell, friends.